All right, everyone, welcome back to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. We just had a wonderful discussion with David Gervin, who is an admission officer out with Pitzer College. And we are literally going from one corner of the United States all the way up to the other corner, to the northeastern corner, and Bates College, which is in Lewiston, Maine. And joining me to discuss Bates College is a senior director of admission at Bates College, or a senior associate dean of admission. We've got Scott Alexander here today. Hi, Scott. How are you?
Good, Ian. Thanks for having me today.
Very delighted to have you here and to learn a little bit more about Bates. My initial introduction to Bates was I traveled with an alumnus of Bates who was a Skidmore admission rep through Asia. He loved Bates, I think, a little bit more than Skidmore. And he didn't talk about that in his presentations, but off the air, he was like, yeah, I love Bates. And so I wonder if you could just introduce a little bit about the college for those who might be unfamiliar and kind of what its peers are, especially within Maine and New England.
Sure. So a lot of students, families may hear about the Bowdoin, Bates, Colby triad. And Maine is so fortunate to have three of the best liberal arts colleges in the country in the state of Maine. And yet we get grouped all together, yet we're all so different from each other. So Bates was founded at a time period when access to education was pretty limited. Mm-hmm. So I like to frame it around Bates's founders being disruptors of higher education. So they wanted to educate women and formerly enslaved folks and international students, which was pretty radical for the time. If you think about it, we've been educating women for about 100 years before most of our competitors. So really like radical progressive history. And I think you see that play out throughout the college's tenure from Benjamin Mays, who was a leader of the civil rights movement, was spiritual mentor for Martin Luther King Jr. And we just celebrated a few days ago the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, which was written by Bates graduate Ed Muskie when he was a senator from the state of Maine. So a lot of kind of roles and big social movements, and we're proud to say that we have reached carbon neutrality. So we did that in 2016, and now we are going to be climate positive by 2030. So we have a very aggressive sustainability plan at Bates.
That's really cool. When was Bates founded exactly? What year?
1855. So it doesn't
old college
make us the oldest, but makes us amongst the original institutions. And we're part of the NESCAC, which is a fancy acronym. It stands for New England Small College Athletic Conference, which is a little bit of a misnomer because not all 11 schools in the NESCAC are in New England, and then not all of them are small colleges either. So, but that is our athletic association.
I want to unpack that a little bit more, but first, because I just want to take this opportunity, and I'm not always going to contrast and compare Bates and Pitzer, but just because of this particular show, it's very interesting to hear you talk about things like social justice and sustainability, which are big aspects of what Pitzer defines itself by as well. But I'm noting that there's at least 100 years difference between when Pitzer was founded in the 60s and when Bates was founded in the 1850s. To what extent does that tradition and history influence the everyday life of students on the Bates campus today? Is there a real notable experiential difference in belonging to a school that has such a lengthy history?
Right. No, I 100% think there is. So one way, we've never had Greek life, which I know is how Hollywood likes to depict the American college experience.
Sure.
That is not the Bates College experience. So that's not how we framed how students socialize and organize on campus. So we have a variety of housing options, but all of them are mixed by classes and mixed by gender identity. And so students get to choose throughout their time where they want to cohabitate. I think another big choice, this is a pride point for Bates, is that we have one dining hall on campus. Now, I've worked at other institutions that have multiple dining halls, and you start seeing the student population self-segregate. So at Bates, we want to have our students cross paths as many times a day as we can. And at Bates, we have unlimited swipes, so they can go in the dining hall 12, 13 times a day if they want. And they get to see each other and sit down over meals. And it does help when you have good food. We just received a ranking today of being in the top 10 for quality of food in the country. So that always helps. And so I think you see that play out too. Also how we celebrate certain days, like Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Because of that connection with Benjamin Mays, we do cancel class every MLK Day. and students organize an entire day looking at diversity broadly defined, specifically lately looking at racial inequity and injustice in the United States. And one of the traditions at Bates is that Benjamin Mays was the president of Morehouse College. So the Morehouse College debate team actually comes to Bates every MLK Day and debates our debate team at Bates, which
that's great.
Pretty good debate team. So it's a nice tradition, and the community shows up for that conversation.
It's great to see that kind of like intersection between the values on which the college was founded and how those show up every day. You know, that I think the idea of probably wanting to educate those who typically don't have access to education means more integrated discussions in a dining hall. And so it's cool how that extends from the 1850s all the way up to the 2020s. It's also really interesting to see that school spirit takes on a lot of different kinds of forms. A lot of people think school spirit is just found in cheering for the football team or the basketball team, you know, painting your face and going to the games. And there are these other aspects of school spirit that can show up in other kinds of meaningful ways. But of course, at Bates, you do have varsity athletics, and that is a part of, you know, being a part of the NESCAC. How does varsity athletics show up for a small college like Bates? And, you know, how much is it a part of every student's experience there versus those who are just athletes?
Sure. So about 80% of students do some type of athletic activity.
Wow, 80%.
80%. So it's pretty significant.
Yeah.
So 40% of students are on a varsity sport. I think gone are the days where students actually may do like lacrosse, soccer, and football, right? Often we have students who have excelled in a particular sport. Maybe the runners do run all 3 seasons, cross country, indoor, outdoor, but you don't really see students doing a sport more than one season nowadays. And being part of the NESCAC, each school agrees to field very competitive teams. So this is, like the Ivy League, the most competitive Division III league in the country. And so it's important to us that athletics plays a role in the admissions process, but it's proportional to the overall academic mission of each institution. And this is a pretty eclectic array of schools. So you have Amherst College, Williams College, Bowdoin College, Bates, Colby College, Tufts University, Trinity College, Middlebury College, Connecticut College, and Hamilton College. I think I got all of them. Okay. And even the mascots are even more random. So you have everything from a bobcat, which is Bates, which seems kind of normal, to a mammoth, a mule, a camel, an eef, which is a purple cow, Alex, which is Hamilton's recently new mascot, which is a continental after Alexander Hamilton, a panther, a bantam, which is a chicken or a duck, bobcat, as I said, Bates, a polar bear, and I think Jumbo the elephant. I think I got
Jumbo. Yeah, that's Tufts, right?
Yeah, that's Tufts.
Now, Tufts is a lot larger in terms of the student population than Bates. And it seems like if you're competing with an institution that has that kind of draw in terms of the student population, it might be somewhat unfair on the playing field. How does that all kind of play out in terms of the annual standings of different athletics in the NESCAC?
Yeah, Tufts is kind of the outlier in terms of size. You know, Hamilton's the outlier in terms of geography, not being in New England. So, you know, I think the NESCAC would probably pause if Tufts was winning every single sport and winning every national title, but they're not. So, and Tufts does prioritize academics in addition to athletics. So they share the same values as the rest of us.
Interesting. So you've got lots of students who are competing in athletics. You've got, I presume, big rivalries. Is it fair to say that Colby and Bowdoin are probably the biggest rivalries for Bates?
Sure. But it does depend on each sport. So, for instance, our women's rowing team, they, except for this past year, they were 5-time national champions in rowing. So their rivalry is WPI and Williams. So it does depend on each sport, but you know, the football team, it's always, you know, the CBB and competing for football at least.
That's a lot of fun. So I can see how athletes would be involved in this, but Division III, you're not going to find typically those events that are televised. You might get some press around the national championship competitions. It certainly is going to be intercollegiately, there's a lot of bragging rights that are on the line. What is the role for spectators and for just your everyday Bates student in terms of engaging with athletics? Why choose to be a part of a NESCAC school if I'm not a big athlete?
Right. Well, one thing I always point out is just the role of sports culture in the United States, right? When I'm advising, I work mostly with international students, right? I have to clue them in that sports plays a bigger role in the US college experience than you might find in other countries like Canada, the United Kingdom,
Yeah.
Australia. So that's just part of the narrative as Americans that we've constructed about what the US college experience should be like. And so students, it's a way for us to create community, right? They gather, they cheer on their friends. There are certain sports that just bring out larger crowds than others, basketball, football, soccer, right? Those are going to be bigger crowds, but it's just a way to connect with each other. And for Bates, it's also about the holistic approach we take to educating students. So it's not just the mind, but it's the body and the spirit at the same time. So all of that is interconnected, and we're really proud of our scholar athletes. They're just not performing on the athletic fields or in the courts, right? They're competing in the classroom as well.
No, it's a great reminder. I was actually at an alumni event this weekend for Reed, which is where I went to school, Reed College. And we don't have any varsity sports. We do have a PE requirement. So you have to take 6 quarters of PE to graduate from Reed College, despite not having varsity sports. But our dean of students was talking about, we're not just brains on sticks here. Like, we really need to make sure that there is wellness with respect to the body that goes with the mind. And I think that can be harder at a place like Reed, where sports are almost actively discouraged, but could potentially be an easier thing to find at a Bates that has a more significant presence for athletics. So it's a great reminder, as you're looking at schools, you're not just in the classroom all the time. You've got so much other programming that you are a part of as you join these communities, and thinking about what you're going to be doing between classes and on the weekends is almost as important as thinking about what your major is going to be and how you're going to engage in the classroom. So that's a great reminder, I think. I asked David in our session, and I want to ask you as well. Right now, students are kind of, tidying up their last essays. They're getting ready to submit for those early deadlines. What's going on for you at Bates? What's your mindset within the admission office? What are the things that you're focused on as these applications are starting to arrive?
Yeah, so we are wrapping up travel, right? So we have returned to in-person travel. Partially, we're still doing virtual, so a little bit of a hybrid. But we're about to shift gears into another phase of the cycle, which is, you may hear a lot of admissions officers talk about why we enjoy our work. In part, it's cyclical, right? There's different phases of our application cycle, and we're just about to switch from strong, heavy recruitment to reading applications, which is often the favorite time of year for a lot of us. So we are just about to go through reader training. So that means all the admission staff, plus any adjunct folks that we have helping us, which could be retired faculty members who are helping us read applications. We are all about to sit around a virtual space for about a week and just have conversations about the institution, where we're headed, what type of students we are looking to enroll. So it's a very thoughtful, detailed process before we start reading even the first application this year.
Now, within applications, many schools have, they'll take the Common App, and Bates is one of those. And the Common App has a personal essay, and there's an activities list that's included there. It's got some letters of recommendation from teachers, from counselors. Bates doesn't have an essay supplement, however. So there is no additional content that students need to create if they are applying to Bates. And the question I have for you is, without that specific piece to sort of connect that student to Bates, what are some of the things that you and your team are looking for? What are you going to be discussing in reader training for how you spot a student that's going to be a good match for the Bates community?
Yeah, so first, we used to have a supplement question. So when I arrived at Bates about 6 years ago, like other institutions, it was why us? So why, out of the 4,000 colleges and universities, have you decided to apply to this institution? Yeah. And after chatting with our campus partners, which is, the faculty committee on admissions, our president, and the board of trustees, we just decided it wasn't adding a lot of value in our process, meaning that one, it didn't have a predictive value, right? It wasn't judging a student's success broadly defined at Bates. 2, it wasn't helping us make a more informed admission decision. And 3, it was setting up a hurdle for some students, right? I think seniors are very busy people, and we just add another barrier for them.
Yeah.
And so for us, it was just a logical thing to do, and we haven't missed it in the past
Interesting.
5 cycles, because often students are regurgitating what they're finding on the website or maybe in a print piece, and just telling us that. And it's stuff we already knew about Bates. We really didn't need that information about that particular applicant to make a decision about that candidate.
Gotcha. Where else do you find that the specific fit for Bates, and maybe I'm putting, ideas in your head about that sense of fit, but my presumption is with liberal arts colleges, you are still looking for that. Where are the other components of the application where that fit really tends to show up strongly, so that you can make that decision to say, yeah, this is somebody who's going to be a nice contributor to our community?
Well, it's a larger conversation that maybe we can have another day, but fit and match, we've been trying to look at through a racial equity lens. And what does that mean, right? Is it coded language, right? That certain types of students belong at Bates and other types of students don't. So we tried to strip those words of our vocabulary.
Interesting.
As we, once again, going back to the social justice piece that we talked about Bates initially, we're really trying to look at our process through that lens. And so there's no one thing we're looking for when we read applications to judge fit. It's just as how we want to construct the community, which is a little bit more interesting for us.
And I think it gets to, and obviously this is a larger conversation, but I think it's a really interesting question of our institutions kind of selecting students who already would be successful match for their institution, in which case, what value are they adding? Or are these institutions assembling a community, and then the educational experience is what creates the value? And so schools can kind of say, hey, we can educate anyone. That's what we're good at. That's what we're strong with. And so we want to assemble a class that creates this sort of collective value and has a certain kind of feel, fit being something that is really secondary or tertiary to that kind of consideration.
Yeah, it's a super interesting question that we are constantly wrestling with. And I think about like rankings, for instance, which we all know are designed to sell magazines, right? They don't really have value. However, the value they're measuring is the input, right? They're not measuring the output of how we educate students and how they grow and change during their 4 years. So we have to figure out kind of that piece as we look at the value of these types of institutions.
That's right. Yeah, there is certainly more to discuss there. Scott, I want to thank you for coming on this show today, agreeing to be here. I know you've got a busy season ahead of you, but really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Ian. It was a great chat.
Folks, when we come back, we are going to go over to the college finance quarter and talk a little bit about emergency funds. So stick around. We will be right back.